Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku made a deal with a demon to gain infinite power? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had narrowed to the squeal of a metal door, and the hollow click of its latch. For Izuku Midoriya, that sound was a final, damning punctuation mark on the shortest, cruelest sentence ever uttered. You cannot be a hero. The rooftop air, once a symbol of his ascent, of his proximity to his idol, was now thin and suffocating. The bustling city below, a sprawling testament to the heroes who protected it, felt like a personal accusation. Each twinkling light was a dream he couldn't reach, each distant siren a call he could never answer. He stood there, a boy of 14 on the edge of a precipice, not of a building, but of his own existence. His legs, which had carried him up so many flights of stairs in a desperate, hopeful sprint, finally gave out. He collapsed, his knees hitting the gritty concrete with a thud he barely felt. His yellow backpack, a childish beacon of optimism, slid from his shoulder and landed beside him. The notebook, his precious hero analysis for the future, volume 13, slipped from his numb fingers. It fell open, its pages fluttering in the uncaring wind. The charred, wet edges from Bakugo's earlier explosion mocked him, a microcosm of his own scorched and drowned aspirations. All Might's words echoed in the cavern of his skull, a relentless, torturous loop. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic. Realistic. What a venomous, gut-wrenching word. For his entire life, realistic had been the cage others tried to build around him. Doctors with their pitying looks and X-rays of his two-jointed pinky toe. Teachers who advised him to think about a more suitable career. Classmates, led by Kaken, who used realistic as a synonym for useless, worthless, Deku. He had defied them all. He had clung to the flickering ember of his dream with the white-knuckled grip of a zealot. He studied, he analyzed, he trained his body until his muscles screamed, all in the hope that one day, heart and spirit could triumph over the cruel lottery of genetics. And All Might, the symbol of peace, the man whose smile could save thousands, had just casually reached into his chest and snuffed that ember out. He hadn't just closed the door, he had sealed the tomb. Tears, hot and thick, finally broke free. They weren't the noisy, messy sobs of his childhood. These were silent, heavy tears of absolute bereavement. He was mourning a death, his own, the death of the hero he was supposed to become. He wrapped his arms around himself, a pathetic attempt to hold together the pieces of a life that had just been irrevocably shattered. The wind whipped around him, chilling the tear tracks on his cheeks, making his thin frame tremble. It was in this profound nadir of despair, this perfect vacuum of hope, that the shadows on the rooftop began to behave strangely. At first, it was a trick of the fading light, the sun dipping below the horizon and stretching the darkness into unfamiliar shapes. But one shadow, cast by a large air-conditioning unit, didn't stretch. It deepened. It pulled, not like ink on paper, but like a hole being torn in the fabric of the world. The ambient noise of the city, the traffic, the chatter, the life, seemed to mute, as if a thick blanket of silence was being draped over the rooftop. The air grew still and cold, the kind of deep, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Izuku, lost in his grief, didn't notice until the silence became absolute. It was a pressure in his ears, a profound wrongness that finally pierced his misery. He lifted his head, his vision blurry with tears, and wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. The shadow was no longer a shadow. It was coalescing, drawing itself inward, gaining a dimension it had no right to possess. It folded and twisted, smooth as oil, silent as the grave, rising from the ground not as a monster of claws and fangs, but as something far more unnerving. It took the shape of a man. He was tall and impossibly slender, clad in a suit that seemed woven from the very darkness it was born of. It wasn't black fabric. It was an absence of light, a void tailored to a humanoid form. His face was a masterpiece of classical beauty, sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, a jawline that could have been carved from marble. But it was a sterile, unnerving beauty. His skin was the color of pale ash, and his hair was a slick, jet black that seemed to drink the light around it. His eyes were the worst part. They were a solid, uniform silver, like pools of mercury, devoid of pupil or sclera. They held an ancient, chilling intelligence, and they were fixed entirely on Izuku. A despair so pure, a voice spoke, and it was not a sound that traveled through the air to Izuku's ears. It was a thought, a melody of perfectly enunciated syllables that bloomed directly inside his mind. The voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with a terrifying, predatory charm. It is a symphony, little one. A vintage of exquisite sorrow. I have not tasted its equal in a century. Izuku scrambled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic, primal terror. What are you? He stammered, his voice a raw, broken whisper. The figure took a step forward. He didn't walk. He glided, his feet making no sound on the concrete. Who I am is a long and rather tedious story. What I am, is an opportunity. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curving of his lips that did not reach his silver eyes. The expression was not warm or reassuring. It was the satisfied smile of a connoisseur appraising a rare work of art. I have been watching you, Izuku Midoriya, the entity continued, its voice a silken thread weaving through Izuku's thoughts. Not for long, in the grand scheme of things, but your brief existence has been compelling. A singular, burning desire in a world of muted apathy. A will of forged steel in a body of glass. It is a cosmic injustice of the highest order. Every word was a validation. Every phrase was a balm on the raw wound All Might had inflicted. This thing understood. It saw his struggle, his passion, his pain. The fear, while still present, was being crowded out by a desperate, dangerous curiosity. You heard him, the being said, tilting its head. The movement was too smooth, too perfect. The hulking symbol of hypocrisy. He told you to be realistic. He told you your dream was impossible. He was wrong. A spark. Tiny, fragile, but undeniably there. A spark of defiance ignited in the ashes of Izuku's heart. He's All Might, Izuku whispered, the name a prayer and a curse on his tongue. He's the greatest hero. He is a man with a powerful gift he did not earn, telling a boy with a powerful will that he is worthless without one, the entity countered, its mental voice sharp as a shard of ice. He is a gatekeeper, and you are locked outside. Is that justice? Is that heroic? The creature, forelag as it would come to be known, took another gliding step, closing the distance until it stood just a few feet from the trembling boy. It crouched down, bringing its unnervingly perfect face level with Izuku's. The cold emanating from it was intense. I can give you what you want, Izuku Midoriya, it said, its voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial whisper. Not a hand-me-down power. Not a borrowed gift with rules and limitations. I can offer you the key to the engine of creation itself. The potential for all power. The strength to make your dream not just a reality, but the law of the land. Izuku stared into those mercury eyes, his breath hitched in his throat. This was insanity. A grief-induced hallucination. A villain with a bizarre mental quirk. It had to be. But the cold was real, the oppressive silence was real. And the desperate hope blooming in his chest, toxic and beautiful, was terrifyingly real. Why? He managed to choke out. What's the catch? My soul? He had read stories, seen movies. Deals like this always came at the ultimate price. The being actually laughed. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling that resonated in Izuku's bones, a dry, ancient amusement. Your soul? Oh, my dear boy, what would I do with such a fleeting, overwrought thing? Souls are for grubby, unimaginative merchants of the abyss. My tastes are far more refined. It straightened up, gesturing to the city below with a pale, elegant hand. I am old Izuku. I have seen galaxies born and die. I have watched civilizations rise to unimaginable heights only to crumble into dust. It is, for the most part, crushingly boring. The same predictable cycles of hope and despair, love and hate, life and death. Its silver eyes fixated on him again, their intensity pinning him in place. But you are different. That fire in you, that desperate, irrational, beautifully human need to save others, even at the cost of yourself, it is a rare and potent vintage. It is the most interesting thing I have stumbled upon in millennia. Here came the offer. The terms and conditions of his salvation, or his damnation. The price is simple. Negligible, really, Forlag said, its smile returning. I want a front row seat. Let me in. Let me see the world through your eyes. Let me feel what you feel. Let me experience the journey of a true hero, from the very beginning. I will be a passenger, a silent observer in your mind. A small price to pay for omnipotence, wouldn't you agree? A passenger. A spectator. The offer was so simple, so deceptively benign. No eternal servitude. No Faustian damnation. Just an audience. It sounded too good to be true. It was too good to be true. The logical part of his brain, the part that meticulously analyzed hero stats and quirk weaknesses, was screaming at him. This was a trap. This was a lie. This was a monster offering a poisoned chalice. But the other part of him, the part that had just had its heart ripped out on this very rooftop, was screaming louder. He said it was possible. He said I could be a hero. What else do I have left to lose? Izuku started, his voice trembling. I don't even know what you are. I am a solution, Forlag replied smoothly, its answer a perfect, evasive platitude. I am the counterargument to a cruel and unfair universe. I am the power that says yes when the world screams no. Do you need any other name? Before Izuku could respond, a distant, muffled boom echoed from the streets below. It was louder than a car backfiring, deeper than construction work. It was the sound of a villain attack. Izuku's head snapped towards the noise, his body tensing with years of conditioned reflex. He scrambled to the edge of the roof, his fear of the shadowy being momentarily forgotten, replaced by a Pavlovian need to observe, to analyze, to be there. Down in the shopping district he had just walked through, a plume of black smoke was rising into the evening sky. People were screaming, running, the familiar sight of pro-heroes rushing to the scene, Kamui Woods swinging between buildings, death arms leaping across rooftops. Forlag's voice purred in his mind, now with an undercurrent of excitement. It seems you have a chance to test the validity of my offer sooner than expected. A demonstration is in order. Izuku didn't answer. He was already moving, his legs carrying him towards the stairwell door. He didn't know why. It was instinct. He had to see. He had to know. He threw the door open and began to descend, his footsteps echoing in the concrete shaft. Forlag was with him. He couldn't see the being, but he could feel it, a cold presence at the edge of his consciousness, a whisper in the back of his mind. Faster, little hero. Your stage awaits. He hit the ground floor and burst out into the alley, joining the river of panicked civilians flowing away from the disaster. He pushed against the current, his smaller frame allowing him to weave through the crowd. He finally broke through to the front, near the police barricade, and his blood ran cold. It was him. The sludge villain. The one All Might had captured, the one he had foolishly caused to escape by clinging to the hero's leg. It was his fault. This was his fault. The villain was larger now, more chaotic, a swirling morass of filth and rage. And it had a hostage. The heroes were keeping their distance, unable to find a weak point, their quirks ill-suited to the villain's fluid body. Kamui Woods couldn't get a grip. Backdraft was struggling to contain the fires the hostage was setting off, and Death Arms couldn't land a solid punch. And then Izuku saw the hostage's face. Spiky blonde hair. Red, terrified eyes. Explosions bursting weakly, desperately, from the sludge. Kakin. The world tilted on its axis. Time seemed to slow, the chaotic sounds of the scene fading into a dull roar. He saw Bakugo struggle, the frantic, panicked thrashing of the boy who had always been the pinnacle of strength and victory. He saw the look in his eyes, not anger, not pride, but pure, undiluted terror. It was a look Izuku had never seen on his rival's face before. It was the look of someone who was drowning. The heroes were talking, strategizing, waiting for someone with the right quirk. But Bakugo didn't have time. He was suffocating, and in that moment, something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't the heroic impulse from the original timeline, born of selfless, thoughtless instinct. It was something colder, sharper. It was a desperate, furious calculation. My fault. He's dying because of me. The heroes can't save him. All Might used up his time saving me. There is nothing I can do. I am useless. His own powerlessness washed over him, A tsunami of despair even greater than what he had felt on the rooftop. It was the final confirmation of All Might's judgment. He was less than nothing. His presence here, his very existence, had led to this. And then, the whisper. Calm, clear, and seductive amidst the roaring chaos in his soul. The offer stands, Izuku Midoriya said Forelag. You feel it, don't you? The absolute certainty of your failure. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can save him. You can save all of them. You just have to say the word. Be the hero you were always meant to be. His legs were moving before he made the conscious decision. He ducked under the police tape, his mind a maelstrom of terror and a single, shining point of resolve. The heroes shouted at him. Hey kid! Stop! It's too dangerous! He ignored them. His eyes were locked on Bakugo's. For a fleeting second, their gazes met. He saw shock, confusion, and that same horrible fear. I have no power. I have no plan. I am running to my death. But you could have power, the voice whispered, a final, irresistible temptation. Infinite power. Right now. Just say yes. He was 10 feet away from the monster. The heat from the explosions was searing. The stench of sewage and burnt sugar filled his nostrils. He was close enough to see the sludge closing over Bakugo's mouth. This was it. The end of the line. The death of his friend. The ultimate proof of his failure, unless, in the deepest, most broken part of his soul, a single, whispered word took shape. Yes, the world did not just change. It broke. It was not a sensation of power filling him, like water into a cup. It was the sensation of the cup itself shattering, of reality fracturing, of a dam inside his soul bursting open to release a black and ancient ocean. A torrent of energy, colder than the void and crackling with emerald lightning, erupted not from him, but through him. It was a violation, a rewriting of his very being on a quantum level. His nerves screamed as they became conduits for something they were never meant to carry. His vision dissolved into a matrix of screaming code and fractured light. He felt a presence unfurl in his mind, vast and ecstatic. The first taste is always the sweetest, Forlag's thought echoed. No longer a whisper but a triumphant roar that was one with the power surging through him. Izuku raised his hand. He wasn't thinking. He was an instrument. A vessel. He didn't see the sludge villain anymore. Through his new, terrifying senses, he saw the complex molecular bonds holding the creature together. He saw the stolen life force of the man trapped within, a flickering candle in a filthy hurricane. He saw the threads of reality itself, and he knew, with an instinct that was not his own, how to pull them. A tendril of black energy, shot through with vibrant green sparks, lashed out from his outstretched fingers. It didn't strike the villain. It touched it, and the villain simply unraveled. There was no sound, no explosion, no great burst of force. There was only a terrifying, silent deconstruction. The foul sludge didn't splatter, it lost its cohesion. The complex proteins and polymers that formed its body broke down into their base components. The liquid turned to fine, gray dust. The sentience, the stolen life, the rage, it all just ceased to be. In less than a second, the towering, monstrous villain was reduced to a cloud of inert, harmless particles that the wind began to carry away. The man the villain had been, a petty thief with a minor gigantification quirk, collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing, completely unharmed. Katsuki Bakugo fell with him, landing hard on his hands and knees. He coughed and gagged, his lungs burning as he took his first clean breath of air. And then there was silence. A profound, absolute silence that swallowed the screams, the fires, and the sirens. Every single person, the civilians, the police, the pro-heroes, stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. They hadn't seen a quirk. Quirks had rules, they had aesthetics, they had limits. What they had just seen was an act of negation. An erasure. It was like watching a god casually delete a mistake from its creation. Bakugo lifted his head, his chest heaving. He looked past the pile of dust that had been his captor, and stared at the boy standing before him. Izuku Midoriya stood with his arms still outstretched, his small frame silhouetted against the fires. Wisps of black and green energy still coiled around his hand, crackling softly like dying embers. His face was cast in shadow, but his eyes were glowing with a faint, verdant light. He looked at Bakugo, and then at his own hand, a flicker of dawning horror crossing his features. The glow in his eyes faded, the energy dissipated, and the sheer psychic weight of what he had just done crashed down on him. He swayed on his feet, his breath catching in a sob. From a nearby alley, a skeletal figure in a baggy t-shirt had been about to emerge, ready to force his broken body past its limits. Toshinori Yagi, All Might, froze mid-step, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a deep, primal dread. He hadn't felt a power signature like that since his final battle with All for One. No, this was different. All for One's power was a legion, a chaotic symphony of stolen gifts. This was a void. It was a cold, alien, absolute power that felt fundamentally wrong. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that should never have been opened. He looked at the trembling boy, the one he had just told was quirkless and powerless, and saw not a late bloomer, not a hero in the making, but a vessel. A door had been opened on that rooftop, and something terrible had just stepped through. The dream wasn't just dead. It had been buried, and from its grave, a nightmare had been born. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy, ringing pressure in the air where the chaos had been. It was the sound of 100 minds simultaneously failing to compute. The dust of the sludge villain, now indistinguishable from the grime of the alley, settled on the pavement. Fires still crackled, but they seemed distant, their sounds swallowed by the profound wrongness of the moment. Izuku Midoriya stood in the center of it all, the epicenter of the unnatural calm. His arm, still outstretched, trembled violently. The black-green energy that had coiled around it was gone, but a phantom chill remained, a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the evening air. The world swam back into focus, not as a matrix of fundamental forces, but as a sea of staring, horrified faces. He saw the pro-heroes, their jaws slack. He saw the civilians, their phones lowered, their expressions a mixture of awe and abject terror. He saw Kaken, on his hands and knees, staring at him with eyes that were no longer angry or mocking, but wide with a kind of primal, existential dread. Then the pain hit. It wasn't a physical injury. It was the psychic backlash of a mortal mind being used as a conduit for the infinite. It felt like every neuron in his brain had been scraped raw with cosmic sandpaper. A wave of vertigo washed over him, and the world tilted violently. He stumbled, his legs turning to jelly, a choked sob escaping his lips as the sheer, horrifying weight of what he had just done crashed down upon him. He hadn't saved Kaken. He had erased a living being from existence. Breathe, little hero. The voice in his head, Forlag's voice, was no longer a seductive whisper from the outside. It was now an intrinsic part of his own thoughts, a cool, calm current in the frantic river of his panic. They are staring. They require a narrative. Collapse now, and the questions will be unanswerable. Stand, and we will give them a story they can accept. Kid! Are you all right? It was Death Arms, his voice rough with shock. He took a cautious step forward, his posture betraying a professional wariness Izuku had only ever seen heroes use against powerful villains. They were afraid of him. Izuku couldn't form words. His throat was a knot of terror. Tell them, Forlag instructed, the mental words precise and clear, a script being fed directly into his mind. I don't know. A classic. Believable. The power is new to you. It is a shock to your system. I don't know, Izuku stammered out, the words feeling alien in his own mouth. He clutched his head, the neurological agony making his vision spot. It just happened. Kamui Woods, his wooden arms still extended uselessly, spoke next. What was that? What is your quirk? Here is the foundation of the lie, Izuku. Cling to it as you would a life raft. This will be your truth from now on. Forlag's voice was patient, like a teacher guiding a favored student. A late bloomer. A quirk activated by extreme emotional distress. It's a documented phenomenon. Rare but plausible. Tell them it's a form of energy manipulation. Destructive. Unstable. Vague is good. Vague is safe. I think it's my quirk, Izuku managed, his voice trembling. He looked at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. It's never happened before. I thought I was quirkless. The heroes exchanged glances. A stress-activated quirk of that magnitude? Unheard of, but not impossible. It explained the kid's reckless charge. He hadn't been suicidal. He had been instinctually reacting to a dormant power. It was a story that fit, a box they could put this terrifying event into. Paramedics began to move in, checking on Bakugo and the unconscious man who used to be the villain. The noise of the city slowly seeped back in, filling the vacuum. The spell was breaking, but for one person, hiding in the mouth of a nearby alley, the horror was only deepening. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, leaned against the brick wall, a hand pressed to the festering wound on his side. He had felt it. Not just seen it, felt it. A tremor in the force that bound the world together. When that boy had raised his hand, the energy that had poured out was not a quirk. Quirks were biological, a part of the user. This was external. It was a parasitic, ancient power that had latched onto the boy's soul. It felt dark, hungry, and utterly alien. His mind raced. One for all. He had been on the verge of choosing this very boy. His heroic spirit, his selflessness, he was the perfect candidate. But to pass the sacred torch, a power cultivated by generations of heroes to fight evil, into a vessel that was already occupied? What would happen? Would OFA be consumed? Corrupted? Would the two powers merge into something apocalyptic? He couldn't risk it. The world could not afford that risk. With a heart heavier than he had ever known, Toshinori made a decision. He would not offer Izuku Midoriya his quirk. He had to find another successor. But he couldn't just abandon the boy either. He was now a person of interest, a potential threat on a scale that made all for one seem comprehensible. He had to watch him. From a distance. As the authorities took over the scene, guiding a dazed and unresponsive Bakugo away, Toshinori slipped back into the shadows, his mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. He had broken a boy on a rooftop, and in doing so, he may have just unleashed something far worse than any villain he had ever faced. The walk home was a blur. Izuku was questioned briefly by the police, his fabricated story of a sudden quirk manifestation logged with a mixture of awe and bureaucratic procedure. They let him go, advising him to get registered and seek counseling for quirk control. Every step he took away from the scene felt like a step into a new, terrifying life. You see how simple it was? Forlag's voice was a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. Humans crave explanation. They will accept the most convenient one, regardless of its truth. You gave them a story that makes you a prodigy, not a monster. I destroyed him, Izuku whispered to himself, his words lost in the evening traffic. There was a person in there. I just deleted him. You surgically removed a threat, Forlag corrected gently. The host body is unharmed. You saved the explosive one. You prevented further destruction. By any heroic metric, your actions were flawlessly efficient. This is what it means to have real power, Izuku. Not the brutish, messy punching of heroes like All Might, but clean, precise solutions. The demon's logic was a poison, seeping into the cracks of his broken spirit. It made a horrible kind of sense. He had been effective. He had saved Kaken. Wasn't that the goal? The cost, the method, did it matter if the result was a life saved? He was so lost in the war in his own head that he didn't notice the figure slumped on a park bench until he was almost past him. It was Bakugo. He was alone, his school bag on the ground beside him. He wasn't raging or yelling. He was just sitting there, staring at his own hands, which were covered in soot and minor burns. Izuku froze. What was he supposed to say? Are you okay? I'm sorry I terrified you by channeling an eldritch being? Before he could decide whether to run or speak, Bakugo's head snapped up, his red eyes locking onto Izuku's. The look in them was unnerving. The usual explosive fury was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, analytical glare. It was a look of intense, fearful scrutiny. Deku, Bakugo's voice was low, raspy from the sludge. He stood up, not with his usual aggressive swagger, but with a slow, deliberate motion. He walked until he was standing directly in front of Izuku, so close Izuku could smell the lingering scent of burnt caramel from his quirk. What? Bakugo said, his voice barely a whisper. The hell was that? It wasn't a question of what was your quirk. It was a question of what are you? Bakugo had been at ground zero. He had felt the unnatural cold, seen the silent unraveling. He knew, on some deep, instinctual level, he knew that what he had witnessed was not a quirk. The lie Izuku Forelag urged. He is confused. He is afraid. Give him the anchor of the plausible story. Repeat it until it becomes the truth. It was my quirk, Kaken, Izuku said, forcing himself to meet Bakugo's gaze. It came out, because I saw you were in trouble. Bakugo stared at him for a long, silent moment. Izuku could see the war behind his eyes. The desire to believe the simple explanation warring with the gut-level certainty that it was a lie. A quirk was a part of you, like a limb. What he had seen was something wearing Deku like a suit. You've been lying, Bakugo finally snarled, but the accusation lacked its usual heat. It was laced with confusion. All this time. You had a power like that, and you let me push you around? You pretended to be a useless pebble? It was an out. A version of the lie he hadn't even considered, but one that fit Bakugo's worldview perfectly. That Deku had been hiding his power, laughing at him internally for years. It was an insult to his pride, and pride was a fortress Bakugo could retreat into, a familiar wall to hide behind instead of the terrifying, incomprehensible truth. Let him believe it, Forelag advised. His ego is a shield. It will protect your secret better than any argument. Izuku didn't confirm or deny it. He just looked down, letting his silence be interpreted as guilt. Bakugo let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Fine. Keep your damn secrets, you cheating bastard. He shoved past Izuku, bumping his shoulder hard. Just so you know, he threw over his shoulder, his voice tight with a new, strange emotion that sounded almost like a threat. This doesn't change anything. I'm still going to be number one. I'll beat you, whatever the hell you are. He stalked off into the night, not looking back. The rivalry was not over. It had just been reforged in the fires of terror and suspicion, transformed from a childhood conflict into something far darker and more dangerous. The door to his apartment felt like the heaviest thing in the world. He turned the key and stepped inside. Izuku, his mother Inko, rushed to the door, her face a mess of tear stains and frantic worry. I saw the news. The villain attack in our district. I was so scared, I called your phone a dozen times. She stopped short, finally getting a good look at him. His disheveled hair, the grime on his uniform, the haunted look in his eyes. Oh, Izuku, were you there? Are you hurt? She asked, her hands fluttering over him, checking for injuries. He had to do it. He had to tell the lie to the one person in the world whose belief in him had been unwavering. This felt like the greatest betrayal of all. She is your mother, Forelag's voice was soft, almost sympathetic. She has shared your pain for years. Now allow her to share your triumph. Give her this gift. Mom, he said, his own voice sounding distant. I'm okay. Something happened. At the attack, he took a deep breath, the lie solidifying on his tongue. Kaken was captured. The heroes couldn't do anything. I ran in, and my quirk came out. Inko froze, her hands hovering in the air. Her wide, green eyes, so much like his own, filled with a disbelief that was slowly, miraculously, being replaced by a dawning, earth-shattering hope. Your quirk? She whispered, the words fragile, like glass. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He just gave her a small, trembling nod. For a moment, she just stared. Then, the tears came anew, but these were not tears of worry. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic joy. She let out a sob and threw her arms around him, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. Oh, Izuku! My baby! My baby! She cried into his shoulder, her body shaking with relief. You have a quirk. I knew it. I always knew you were special. You can be a hero. You can be a hero. Every word was a twisting knife in his gut. He was getting everything he had ever dreamed of. His mother's joy, the confirmation of his potential, the first step on the path to his dream. And it was all built on a foundation of demonic power and deceit. He hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder, and for the first time, he cried. He cried for the boy he used to be, for the simple dream he had lost, and for the monstrous lie he now had to live. Forelag was silent during the embrace, but Izuku could feel its satisfaction. It was a cold, quiet contentment, like a predator that had successfully lured its prey into the perfect trap. The demon was feeding on this, not just the despair from the rooftop, but this complex, tainted joy. It was all part of the experience. The next 10 months were a strange, surreal purgatory. The news of the miracle quirk manifestation of the boy who saved Katsuki Bakugo became a minor local news story. He was officially registered, his quirk listed as energy deconstruction, a vague but suitably impressive title. To the outside world, he was a prodigy, a late bloomer of incredible potential. To Izuku, he was an apprentice to a demon. He didn't follow All Might's old American dream plan. There was no need to clean a beach to prepare his body. His body was already being rewritten from the inside out by Forlag's power. Instead, his training took place in secret. He would go to the abandoned industrial parks by the coast, places where no one would see him, and he would practice. Forlag was a patient, methodical teacher. The power you wield is chaos itself, the chaos weave as I call it, the demon explained in the quiet of his mind as Izuku stood before a rusted, derelict car. It is the ability to perceive and manipulate the fundamental threads that bind matter and energy. To a novice, it is a sledgehammer. To a master, it is a scalpel. You must learn control. His first attempts were terrifying. He reached out with the power, trying to simply dent the car's door. Instead, the entire vehicle dissolved into a shimmering cloud of metallic dust, just like the sludge villain had. Too much intent. Too much will, Forlag chided gently. You are trying to destroy it. Do not think in such crude terms. Think of it as unmaking. Gently persuade the bonds to release. Coax reality to change its mind. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. He learned to control the flow of energy. He could now create a small, focused beam that would neatly slice a hole through a steel plate, or a wider field that would cause a brick wall to crumble into sand. He learned to enhance his body, funneling the power into his muscles for bursts of impossible speed and strength. He could leap to the top of a 5-story warehouse and land without a sound. But with every success, a piece of the old Izuku eroded away. He stopped watching hero videos. His All Might figurines gathered dust on their shelves. His hero analysis notebooks seemed childish, filled with the naive ramblings of a boy who thought quirks were the ultimate measure of power. He now understood that they were just ripples on the surface of an ocean he could command. He grew more distant, more analytical. Forlag's influence was a slow, creeping tide. The demon didn't push him to be evil. It pushed him to be logical, efficient, and detached. Emotion, Forlag argued, was a liability. Empathy was a distraction from the optimal solution. The goal was to save people, and the most efficient way to do that was with overwhelming, perfectly controlled power. Human connection was an unnecessary variable in that equation. He saw All Might a few times from a distance. The hero seemed to be watching him, his presence a somber, silent judgment. They never spoke. The chasm between them was now too wide to cross. Finally, the day of the UA entrance exam arrived. He stood before the towering gates of his dream school, not with the nervous excitement he had always imagined, but with a cold, hollow sense of purpose. He was not here to see if he was worthy. He was here to demonstrate his power. The written portion was trivially easy. The true test was the practical exam. As he stood in the mock city, surrounded by other nervous examinees, he could feel their energy, their quirks buzzing in the air. They looked at his plain tracksuit and unassuming build and dismissed him. He was used to it. He found a quiet spot and centered himself, the familiar cold of the chaos weave pooling in his core. Show them, little hero, Forlag whispered, a thrill of anticipation in its tone. Show them what real power looks like. Let the new age begin. The moment the exam started, Izuku was a phantom. While others charged head-on at the one-point robots, Izuku simply walked forward. A one-pointer lunged, its metallic claws screeching. Izuku raised a single finger. A thread of black-green energy, thin as a needle, shot out and touched the robot's head. Its optical sensor went dark, and it collapsed, inert. He hadn't destroyed it. He had simply unmade the electrical circuit in its central processor. It was surgical. Efficient. In the observation room, the mood shifted from standard assessment to stunned silence. That's him, Aizawa grunted, his eyes narrowed behind his goggles. The sludge villain kid. Midoriya. His score is climbing at an absurd rate. His application of power is fascinating, Nisa said, his paws steepled before him, a glint in his beady eyes. He isn't using blunt force. He's dismantling them with pinpoint precision. There's no wasted energy. All Might stood in the back of the room, a grim expression on his face. He watched the screen, his heart sinking with every robot that fell. He wasn't seeing a future hero. He was seeing a weapon of terrifying potential being field-tested. Izuku moved through the city like a ghost. 2-pointer, dismantled. 3-pointer, its joints turned to dust, causing it to collapse into a heap of scrap. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was just lethally, horrifyingly effective. He had amassed 78 villain points in under 6 minutes. He didn't bother with rescue points. Saving others was inefficient when the primary objective was neutralizing threats. That was Fourleg's logic. Then, the ground began to shake. The 0-pointer, the colossal arena trap, emerged from between the buildings, its shadow falling over everything. The other students did the smart thing. They ran. It was an obstacle, not an objective. Izuku stood his ground, watching it approach. A fine canvas for a masterpiece, Fourleg hummed in his mind. He saw a girl with brown hair trapped under a piece of rubble, directly in the robot's path. The girl from the gate who had been kind to him. A flicker of something old, panic, concern, the desire to help, surfaced in his chest. The objective is clear, Fourleg stated calmly. The girl is a secondary concern. The primary threat must be neutralized. Protect her by eliminating it. The logic was cold, but it was sound. Izuku looked at the giant robot. Punching it felt crude. There was a better way. A more definitive way. He walked forward, into the path of the advancing behemoth, raising his entire hand as time. The other students, Uraraka included, watched in stunned terror, thinking he was about to be crushed. Bakugo, from several blocks away, saw the small green figure standing against the giant, and felt a cold dread grip him. Izuku closed his eyes and reached out, not with his hand, but with his senses. He felt the complex machinery, the thousands of interlocking parts, the power core thrumming in its chest. He felt the very atomic structure of the alloys that gave it form, and he gently pulled the threads. There was no explosion. No mighty crash. There was only a profound, unnatural silence. The 0-pointer froze mid-stride. A web of faint, green cracks appeared all over its chassis, and then, with a soft, rustling sound, like a sandcastle in the tide, the entire 20-story robot disintegrated. It collapsed into a mountain of fine, metallic dust, which billowed out in a great, gray cloud, harmlessly washing over the entire area. Izuku lowered his arm, the black-green energy receding from his hand. He stood in the shadow of a mountain of dust that had, a second ago, been an unstoppable machine. He had saved the girl. He had neutralized the threat. He had passed the test. He opened his eyes and looked around. Every single student was staring at him. Uraraka looked from the pile of rubble that had trapped her to him, her expression not one of gratitude, but of sheer, unadulterated shock. Bakugo stood frozen, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, the memory of the sludge villain's silent end replaying in his mind on a terrifyingly grand scale. In the observation room, Aizawa was speechless. Nisa was smiling, a deeply unsettling, calculating smile. And All Might felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injury. Izuku stood alone in the center of the silent all. He had achieved an overwhelming victory. He had proven his power. He was in. But as he looked at the faces of his future classmates, he saw no camaraderie, no admiration. He saw fear. He had won his dream, but in doing so, he had become something to be dreaded. A magnificent performance, Fourleg's voice purred, the only sound in the silent world of his mind. The first step is complete. Welcome to UA, my hero. The first few weeks at UA were a study in surreal isolation. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had dreamed of this school with every fiber of his being, now walked its halls like a ghost. He was the top scorer of the entrance exam, a fact that had spread through the hero course like wildfire. His name was whispered in corridors, his overwhelming display of power recounted with a mixture of awe and nervous apprehension. He was a legend before he had even completed his first foundational heroics class. But legends are not approachable. They are figures of myth, set apart from the mundane. His classmates, the vibrant and powerful students of Class 1A, treated him with a cautious, deferential distance. They saw him as a prodigy, a titan in training, not as a peer. Kirishima's friendly overtures were tinged with a nervous respect. Yaoyoro's brilliant analyses were offered to him as if seeking the approval of a higher authority. Uraraka, the girl he had saved, would offer him a bright, wavering smile, but her eyes held a shadow of the shock she'd felt in the exam arena. She remembered the mountain of dust. He sat in the back of the classroom, observing, analyzing, his old habits now filtered through a colder, more detached lens. Forlag was a constant presence in his mind, a silent co-pilot offering commentary on everything he saw. Observe the explosive one, Katsuki Bakugo, Forlag would muse as Bakugo seated in his seat. His power is potent but undisciplined. All force, no finesse. He is a blunt instrument. Useful, but limited. The half-man half-boy, Todoroki Shoto. A fascinating duality of energies. He suppresses half of his potential due to an emotional conflict. Illogical. A warrior who brings only half his arsenal to a battle is a fool, regardless of his reasons. This constant, dispassionate analysis was changing him. His old, fanboyish enthusiasm for quirks was being replaced by a cold assessment of their tactical value. He didn't see heroes in training. He saw assets, liabilities, and variables. The warmth of camaraderie, the very thing he had longed for, was a concept that was becoming increasingly alien to him. His smiles were practiced, his social responses calculated. He was a perfect imitation of a friendly, slightly awkward teenager, but it was a meticulously crafted performance. Aizawa, his homeroom teacher, was not fooled. The man's perpetually tired eyes missed nothing. He watched Izuku with an unnerving intensity, his gaze lingering whenever Izuku answered a question with flawless, textbook precision or completed a physical test with an efficiency that bordered on inhuman. During the quirk apprehension test on the first day, Izuku had deliberately held back, using just enough of the chaos weave to secure first place without doing anything reality-bending. He threw the softball into low orbit, but did so with a simple application of kinetic force, making it look like a generic super-strength quirk. Aizawa hadn't bought it for a second. The man had seen the entrance exam footage. He knew what Izuku was capable of, and the quiet, controlled display was, in its own way, more terrifying than an overt show of force. It implied a level of control that was simply not natural for a teenager with a newly manifested quirk. The lie was holding, but it was a fragile thing, a sheet of glass over a fathomless abyss. The trip to the unforeseen simulation joint was supposed to be a reprieve. A chance for the class to finally see each other's quirks in a controlled, rescue-oriented environment. As the bus rumbled along, his classmates chattered excitedly. "I can't wait to show you guys what I can do. It's gonna be supermanly," Kirishima declared, hardening his fist. "My naval laser will shine like a star in the service of rescue," Aoyama proclaimed with a dramatic pose. Izuku sat by the window, watching the scenery pass, only half listening. Rescue scenarios, Forlag noted with a touch of academic disdain. An inefficient allocation of resources. The most effective form of rescue is the preemptive and absolute elimination of the threat. Why spend an hour saving 10 people from a collapsing building when you could have spent 1 minute on making the villain who caused the damage in the first place? "Hey Midoriya," Tsuyu Ajui's blunt voice cut through his internal monologue. "Your quirk is amazing, but it seems kind of scary. It's not really suited for delicate rescue work, is it?" Ribbit. The entire front half of the bus went quiet, all eyes turning to him. It was the question they had all been wondering. "She is probing for weakness. For limitation," Forlag advised. "Reassure them. Show them the scalpel, not just the sledgehammer." Izuku turned from the window and offered a small, practiced smile. "It's all about control, Ajui-san. Any quirk can be destructive if you're not careful. I'm still learning, but I can be gentle with it." To demonstrate, a tiny wisp of black-green energy appeared over his palm. He held it above a loose thread on his uniform, and the thread simply vanished, leaving the fabric around it perfectly untouched. The class stared, mesmerized and unnerved. It was a display of pinpoint precision that was arguably more impressive than dissolving the zero-pointer. "See?" he said softly. "It just takes focus." Aizawa, listening from the front, felt a chill crawl up his spine. The kid was a walking paradox, a god of destruction with the control of a neurosurgeon. It didn't make sense. Their arrival at the USJ was met with the expected fanfare. The Space Hero, 13, was there to greet them. Their speech about the dual nature of quirks, their potential to save and to harm, carrying a strange, unintended resonance for Izuku. He stood there, the living embodiment of that very duality, a power to save millions that could just as easily unmake the planet. And then, the lights flickered and died. The fountain in the central plaza sputtered. A dark, swirling vortex of purple-black mist opened up at the base of the stairs, a wound in the fabric of the air itself. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to confusion, and then, as figures began to emerge from the portal, to cold, stark terror. This was not a simulation. "Stay back!" Aizawa yelled, pulling his signature yellow goggles over his eyes. 13. Protect the students. This is real. Dozens of villains poured out of the warp gate, a motley collection of thugs and criminals, their faces twisted in malicious glee. Leading them were three figures. A man whose entire body was made of the same purple mist as the portal. A young man with pale blue hair, his face and body obscured by severed hands that were clasped onto him. And a hulking, monstrous beast, its skin a dark purple, its muscles bulging unnaturally, its brain exposed, and its eyes vacant and staring, like a doll's. "We are the League of Villains," the man covered in hands announced, his voice a scratchy, petulant whine. "We took the liberty of crashing your little field trip to say hello to the symbol of peace. I see he's not here. Maybe if we kill a few of his students he'll show up." His casual, childish threat hung in the air, more chilling than any bombastic declaration. This wasn't a robbery or a hostage situation. This was a statement. This was an act of nihilistic terrorism. Fascinating, Forlag's voice was alight with academic curiosity, like a biologist discovering a new, particularly venomous species. Their motivations appear to be rooted in a form of pathological attention-seeking. The leader's posture suggests extreme psychological instability. An interesting case study. Before anyone could react, the mist villain, Kurogyri, expanded, his shadowy form enveloping the students. "We will scatter you," his disembodied voice echoed, "and we will torture you. And we will kill you." The world became a swirling vortex of purple and black. Izuku felt a disorienting lurch, the ground vanishing from beneath his feet. He was falling, tumbling through a non-space that smelled of ozone and decay. He had a brief glimpse of Kirishima and Bakugo being warped together, of Uraraka vanishing into the maelstrom, and then he was spat out, landing with a splash in the water of the shipwreck zone. He surfaced, sputtering, alongside Tsuyu Azuri and Minoru Mineta. They were in the middle of a large artificial lake, on a boat designed for shipwreck simulations, and the water around them was beginning to churn as villains with aquatic quirks began to close in. Mineta was, predictably, panicking, his shrieks echoing across the water. "We're gonna die. We're gonna be eaten by fish freaks. I never even got to touch Yayorozu's." "Quiet," Izuku's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as ice. The authority in it was so absolute that Mineta's babbling instantly ceased. Azuri looked at him, her large, expressive eyes widening slightly at his sudden change in demeanor. The friendly, awkward Midoriya was gone. In his place was a field commander. "The threats are numerous but weak," Forlag analyzed with brisk efficiency. "Their quirks are environmentally dependent. The optimal solution is to remove them from their environment. However, a more instructive demonstration is in order. Show your classmates the difference between their power and yours." "Azuri-san," Izuku said, his eyes scanning the approaching villains, cataloging their quirks. A shark man. A man with tentacles. A woman who could seemingly breathe underwater. "What are your abilities?" "Call me Tsu. I can do whatever a frog can. Long tongue, stick to walls, jump high, And I can secrete a mild paralyzing toxin, she replied, her voice steady despite the situation. Mineta? My hair! I can pull off these sticky balls and they'll stick to anything but me, he wailed. Good, Izuku said. He turned his gaze to the water. The first villain, a man with a shark-like mutation, was lunging towards the boat, his jaws wide. Do not unmake him, Forlag instructed. That is too final. It inspires fear, not loyalty. Show them control. Show them dominance. Izuku reached out his hand, palm flat towards the water. The water directly in front of the boat began to swirl. He wasn't manipulating the water itself, he was manipulating the space it occupied, twisting it. A massive whirlpool, easily 30 feet across, formed in seconds, its vortex spinning with impossible speed. The villains, who had been confidently swimming forward, were suddenly caught in a powerful, inescapable current. Their confident grins turned to panic screams as they were sucked towards the center. Tsu, Izuku said, not even looking at her, his focus entirely on the whirlpool. When I give the word, use your tongue to grab Mineta and me and jump as far as you can towards the central plaza. Mineta, throw as many of your spheres as you can into the center of the vortex. What are you doing? Mineta stammered. Creating a cage, Izuku replied calmly. He focused his will, and the chaos weave surged through him. The water at the center of the whirlpool began to compress. He wasn't freezing it, he was warping reality, forcing the H2O molecules into a state of matter that shouldn't exist, a hyperdense, semi-solid lattice. Now! He commanded. Mineta, spurred by sheer terror, began ripping the purple spheres from his head and flinging them wildly into the whirlpool. Aju's long, powerful tongue shot out, wrapping around Izuku's and Mineta's waists. With a mighty leap, she launched them from the boat just as Izuku clenched his fist. The whirlpool collapsed inward with a sound like a thunderclap. All the villains, along with Mineta's sticky spheres, were slammed together in the center. The super-compressed water solidified around them, trapping them in a grotesque, writhing ball of limbs and panicked faces, all stuck together by Mineta's quirk. The makeshift prison of villains and hyperdense water bobbed on the surface of the now calm lake. They were neutralized. Not a single one had been seriously harmed. They landed on the edge of the plaza, and Ajuri released them. She and Mineta stared back at the water, then at Izuku, their expressions a mixture of awe and deep-seated fear. He had treated the entire encounter like a simple physics problem to be solved, the villains nothing more than variables in an equation. That was amazing, Midoriya-kun, Ajuri said, her usual bluntness softened by shock. See? Forleg's voice was smug. Dominance without death. Efficiency without brutality. They see you as a savior now, not just a monster. This is how you build a following. But there was no time to dwell on it. A loud explosion from the central plaza drew their attention. They looked to see Aizawa, Eraserhead, fighting. And he was incredible. A whirlwind of capture scarf and hand-to-hand combat, he was single-handedly taking down dozens of villains, his quirk-erasing glare disabling them one by one. But he was outnumbered. And the leaders of the league were just watching. Waiting. We have to help him, Ajuri said. No, Izuku replied, his gaze fixed on the hulking beast at Shigaraki's side. The Nomu. Sensei is handling the grunts. He's buying time. The real threat is that one. He could feel it. A void of power radiating from the creature. His chaos weave senses, which could perceive the intricacies of most quirks, saw nothing when he looked at the Nomu. It was a black hole, a horrifying amalgamation of things that should not be. Careful, Izuku, Forlag's voice held a note of genuine caution for the first time. This creature is artificial. A construct of stolen and warped biological data. It has been designed to counter a specific type of power. Brute force. It possesses extreme shock absorption and hyperregeneration. A direct counter to All Might. As they watched, Aizawa's incredible run came to a brutal end. Shigaraki, the man-child with the hands, dashed forward with horrifying speed. Aizawa erased his quirk, but Shigaraki was still a fast and agile fighter. As they fought, the Nomu moved. It was a blur of motion, a living battering ram. It caught Aizawa, smashing his head into the concrete with a sickening crunch. The sound of his bones breaking echoed across the plaza. The students who had gathered at the entrance, held back by 13, let out a collective gasp of horror. Shigaraki laughed, a high, grating sound. "You're so cool, Eraserhead. So cool." He reached down, his 5 fingers spread, ready to place them on Aizawa's face. His quirk, Izuku realized with a jolt, must be some form of disintegration on touch. And in that moment, something shifted inside Izuku. It wasn't logic. It wasn't tactical analysis. It was a white-hot flash of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw his teacher, a true hero who fought quirkless, being tortured and murdered by a petulant child. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty of it all, the carefully constructed dam of emotional detachment that Forelag had been building for months cracked. Izuku, wait, he didn't listen. He moved. He poured the chaos weave into his legs and crossed the 100 yards to the plaza in less than a second, appearing as a green-black blur. He didn't arrive with a heroic shout. He arrived in chilling silence. Shigaraki's hand was inches from Aizawa's face when Izuku's own hand clamped down on his wrist like a vice. "Don't touch him," Izuku said, his voice dangerously low. Shigaraki froze, his red eyes widening behind the hand on his face. He looked at the boy who had appeared from nowhere, then at the iron grip on his wrist. "Who the hell are you?" he rasped. "Get the kid, Nomu," Shigaraki ordered. The hulking beast turned its vacant eyes on Izuku. It let out a guttural shriek and threw a punch, a blow that could have pulverized a truck. The air shrieked as its fist cut through it. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply tightened his grip on Shigaraki's wrist and raised his free hand. And he caught the Noma's punch. The impact was immense. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact, cracking the very foundations of the USJ and blasting a crater into the ground beneath them. But Izuku didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He held the Noma's house-sized fist in his palm, the creature's unstoppable momentum completely and utterly negated. Silence. Again. The same stunned, horrified silence from the entrance exam, but this time it was shared by heroes and villains alike. Bakugo, who had just finished blasting his way through the villains in the collapse zone with Kirishima, emerged onto the plaza just in time to see it. His blood ran cold. Shigaraki stared, his mouth agape. It absorbed the shock. "How? It's a good trick," Izuku said, his voice devoid of any emotion. His eyes began to glow with that familiar, terrifying green light. Shock absorption. It nullifies kinetic impact. A perfect weapon to fight All Might. He squeezed, and the sound of bones crunching echoed in the plaza. Not his. The Noma's. He was crushing the creature's fist. "But you made a mistake," Izuku continued, his voice a dead monotone. He looked from the Noma's fist to its vacant eyes. "You built your monster to fight a puncher. I'm not a puncher." He let go of Shigaraki, shoving him backward, and placed his open palm on the Noma's chest. "Izuku, don't! This level of output is unstable." Forelag's voice was a frantic shout in his mind, but it was drowned out by the roaring fury. "Let's see you absorb this." He wasn't pushing. He wasn't striking. He was simply activating the chaos weave at its most fundamental, most terrifying level. He wasn't attacking the Noma's body. He was attacking the laws that held it together. He reached into its artificially constructed DNA, into the stolen and warped quirks that gave it life, and he began to pull the threads. It was not a quick or clean death. It was a gruesome, horrifying spectacle. The Nomu's dark purple skin began to bubble and hiss, not from heat, but from molecular decay. Its muscles, designed for impossible strength, began to unravel into fibrous strands. Its hyperregeneration fought back, attempting to stitch the dissolving flesh back together, but it was like trying to patch a disintegrating cloth. For every cell it regenerated, 1,000 more were unmade. The creature let out a sound, not a shriek of pain, because it was likely incapable of feeling it, but a sound of pure, systemic failure. It was the sound of a machine being taken apart while it was still running. It began to fall apart, not in chunks, but like a statue of sand in a hurricane. Its limbs dissolved into fine gray dust. Its torso collapsed inward. Its exposed brain turned to ash. In the span of 5 seconds, the monster designed to kill the symbol of peace was reduced to a shifting pile of gray powder at Izuku Midoriya's feet. The plaza was utterly silent, save for the ragged, horrified breathing of everyone present. The low-level thugs, the professional villains, his classmates, his teacher, they all stared at the small, unassuming boy standing over a pile of dust, his hands still glowing with an unholy light. Shigaraki was trembling, not with rage, but with a mixture of disbelief and utter terror. He began to scratch his neck, his nails digging into his skin. You cheated, he whimpered. That's a cheat code. That's not fair. You're not a student. You're a monster. Izuku turned his head, his glowing green eyes locking onto Shigaraki. The look in them was not heroic. It was not angry. It was empty. It was the look of a void that had taken the shape of a boy. That was the image that greeted All Might as he finally burst through the doors of the USJ. He arrived not to the sight of his students in peril, but to a scene of absolute stillness. He saw his bleeding, broken colleague, Aizawa, on the ground. He saw the terrified villains, frozen in place, and he saw his would-be successor, Izuku Midoriya, radiating an aura of such profound and terrifying power that it made the hairs on All Might's arms stand on end. He stood over a pile of dust where a great monster should have been, his gaze fixed on a trembling Shigaraki. All Might's signature, booming laugh died in his throat. His famous smile faltered. He had come here to save his students from a villain, but as he looked at the terrifying, absolute power radiating from the boy he had rejected, a horrifying thought crossed his mind. Who was going to save them all from him? The arrival of All Might should have been a crescendo, a bombastic, triumphant fanfare that signaled the end of the crisis. His iconic silhouette filling the doorway, his voice booming "I am here," was the universal symbol for everything is going to be okay. But today, the symbol was broken. He burst onto the scene ready for a desperate battle, only to find the war already over, won by a force he could not comprehend. His smile, the unshakable bedrock of a nation's hope, faltered. His eyes, usually blazing with righteous fury, were wide with a deeply unsettled shock. He saw the tableau of horror, Aizawa, his friend and colleague, lying broken and bloody. His students, his precious charges, scattered and terrified. And in the center of it all, Izuku Midoriya, a boy radiating an aura so cold and immense it felt like a distortion in the very air of the dome. He stood over a pile of fine, gray dust, his glowing green eyes fixed on a whimpering, terrified Tamura Shigaraki. The power pouring off the boy was a tangible thing, a pressure against the skin, a low thrum in the bones. It wasn't the heroic warmth of One for All. It was a sterile, cosmic cold, the absolute zero of a void that had been given form and purpose. You cheated, Shigaraki was muttering, scratching his neck with a frantic, obsessive motion. This isn't a hero. This is a final boss. No, this is a glitch in the game. An exploit. Kurojiiri, the warped villain, materialized beside his master, his misty form coalescing with a worried urgency. Tamura Shigaraki, we must withdraw. All Might is here, and that thing, we cannot analyze its capabilities. Our mission is a failure. Shigaraki's terrified gaze snapped from Izuku to All Might. For a moment, a flicker of his initial bravado returned. Fine, he hissed. Game over for now. But we'll be back for you, symbol of peace, and we'll find a way to uninstall your little cheat code. With that, Kurojiiri's mist enveloped them both, and they vanished, leaving behind only the lingering sense of their malice and the profound, unnatural silence in their wake. The tension, held taut like a bowstring, finally snapped. The remaining low-level villains, who had been frozen in terror, seemed to collectively realize they were now in a large building with a very angry All Might and a boy who could turn people to dust. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands in a near-instantaneous, universal surrender. All Might moved, a blur of motion, securing the remaining villains with practiced efficiency, his actions automatic while his mind reeled. He checked on Aizawa, his expression grim. He's alive. Barely. We need medics, now. His students began to converge on the central plaza, their faces pale, their eyes drawn irresistibly to Izuku. He stood perfectly still, the unholy green glow in his eyes slowly fading, the immense pressure of his power receding back into him like a tide going out. The mask of cold fury dissolved, replaced by a blank, exhausted expression. He swayed on his feet, The adrenaline and the raw, untamed rage that had fueled him suddenly draining away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. He had won. He had saved everyone. He had defeated an enemy designed to kill the world's greatest hero. He should have felt triumphant. Elated. Relieved. He felt nothing. It was a hollow, cavernous emptiness in his chest where those feelings were supposed to be. He looked at Aizawa's broken form being carefully tended to by 13. He looked at his classmates, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and a new, distinct fear. He tried to summon the swell of heroic pride he had read about in comics, and seen on All Might's face 1,000 times. But the emotional well was dry. There was only a cold, logical assessment of the facts, threat neutralized. Allies secured. Mission successful. It was like reading a debriefing report about someone else's actions. Excellent work, Izuku, Forlag's voice purred in his mind. It was the only voice he could clearly perceive. You lost control. The rage was inefficient. Unstable. But the result was undeniable. You have cemented your position. You are no longer just a prodigy. You are a deterrent. Izuku didn't respond. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had just unmade a living creature with a touch. They didn't feel like his own. Midoriya! Kirishima was the first to approach, his usual boisterous energy tempered by a visible awe. Dude! That was... I don't even have words. You were incredible. You saved Mr. Aizawa. You saved all of us. He reached out and clapped Izuku on the shoulder. The gesture was meant to be friendly, comradely. But Izuku flinched, a subtle, almost imperceptible recoiling from the physical contact. The touch felt distant. An external stimulus he could register but not truly feel. He forced his lips to curve into what he hoped was a reassuring smile. It was a motion he had practiced in the mirror, an imitation of the genuine, radiant smiles he used to have. It was a hero's smile. It was completely empty. I'm glad everyone is safe, he said, the words coming out perfectly, the tone modulated to sound humble and relieved. It was a flawless line delivery. The other students gathered around, their fears slowly being overshadowed by a wave of post-crisis adrenaline and gratitude. That monster, what you did to it, that was insane! Kaminari exclaimed. You were so cool and calm, Midoriya-kun, Yaoyorozu added, her hand pressed to her chest. Uraraka and Ida rushed to his side, their faces etched with concern. Midoriya-kun, are you alright? Ida asked, his hands chopping the air with his usual rigidity, though his voice was laced with genuine worry. Using your quirk to that extent must have put a terrible strain on you. I'm fine, Izuku said, the smile fixed on his face. Just a little tired. He was the center of attention, the hero of the hour. This was the moment he had fantasized about his entire life. Being surrounded by his peers, his friends, being acknowledged for his heroism. He was living his dream. So why did it feel like he was watching it happen to someone else on a television screen? This is the price, Forlag explained, its voice calm and matter-of-fact. The price was never your soul in some crude, theological sense. It was your perspective. To wield the power of a god, you must begin to see the world as a god does. From a great, lonely distance. These fleeting, chaotic human emotions, they are a hindrance to clear, objective thought. I am simply filtering them for you. Streamlining your process. You should be grateful. Gratitude. That was another feeling he couldn't quite locate. The police and paramedics arrived, and the USJ was transformed into a formal crime scene. The students were gathered and accounted for, their statements taken by a weary-looking detective Tsukachi. When it was Izuku's turn, he recounted the events with a cool, clinical clarity that unnerved the seasoned detective. There was no trauma in his voice, no panic. He described the unmaking of the Nomu with the same detachment one might use to describe dismantling a faulty appliance. Tsukachi, whose quirk allowed him to detect lies, found himself in a strange position. Everything the boy said was, on a factual level, true. He had fought the villains, he had protected his teacher, he had destroyed the monster. But the detective's quirk didn't register emotional truth, and he could sense a profound, disturbing dissonance between the horrific events the boy was describing and his unnervingly calm demeanor. It felt like the truest lie he had ever heard. After the interviews, the students of Class 1A were bused back to UA. The mood on the bus was a stark contrast to the trip there. The excited chatter was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber silence. They were all processing the reality of the hero world, the violence, the pain, the closeness of death. And they were processing the reality of Izuku Midoriya. He sat by the window again, just as he had that morning, but now a palpable bubble of space surrounded him. His classmates would glance at him, their expressions a complex cocktail of gratitude, admiration, and a deep, instinctual fear. He was their savior. He was also an unknown quantity, a wielder of a power that defied the known rules of their world. He had saved them, yes, but the manner of it, the cold efficiency, the horrifying disintegration of the Nomu, had been deeply unsettling. He was one of them, but he was not like them. Bakugo sat several rows back, staring daggers into the back of Izuku's head. He hadn't said a word since the fight. He was vibrating with a silent, furious energy. What he had seen today was a confirmation of his deepest fears. That wasn't Deku. The useless, crying, hero-worshipping pebble he had known his whole life could not have done what he had just witnessed. That thing that had caught the Noma's punch, that had looked at Shigaraki with those dead, glowing eyes, it was an imposter wearing his childhood rival's face. The rivalry was dead. A rivalry implied a competition between relative equals. This was something else. This was like a knight declaring a rivalry with a hurricane. All Bakugo felt now was a burning, helpless rage and a cold knot of terror. He had to get stronger. Not to beat Deku and become number one, but to survive in a world where something like Deku existed. When the bus finally arrived back at UA, the students were met by the principal, Nizu, and other faculty members. They were dismissed for the day, advised to go home and rest. As Izuku turned to leave with the others, a quiet voice stopped him. Midoriya. A word, if you please. It was Aizawa. He wasn't in his hero costume anymore. He was in a hospital gown, sitting in a wheelchair. His entire body was a patchwork of bandages. Both his arms were in casts, and his head was wrapped so thoroughly that only his tired, black eyes were visible. Despite his condition, those eyes were as sharp and penetrating as ever. A nurse stood by his side, looking worried. Sensei! Izuku exclaimed, his practiced smile clicking back into place. You should be resting. Are you okay? No, Aizawa replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp from his injuries. I am not okay. But we need to talk. Now. He gestured with his head toward an empty classroom. The nurse sighed but helped wheel him inside. Izuku followed, a cold feeling seeping into the pit of his stomach. This wasn't going to be a thank you. Aizawa had the nurse wait outside and close the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from the setting sun slanting through the large windows. Dust motes danced in the orange beams. For a long moment, Aizawa just sat there, studying Izuku with an unnerving intensity. They're calling you a hero, Aizawa finally said, his voice flat. The other students. The faculty. The police. They're all marveling at your power, your composure under pressure. Izuku remained silent, his smile beginning to feel stiff on his face. I was there, Midoriya, Aizawa continued, his voice dropping lower. I was on the ground. I saw your face when you fought that thing. I saw your eyes. That wasn't composure. That was absence. There was nothing there. The accusation hung in the silent room. Aizawa had seen past the performance. He had seen the void. Be careful, Izuku, Forlag warned. This man is dangerously perceptive. He operates on logic and observation, not emotion. He cannot be easily swayed. I did what I had to do to save you, Sensei, Izuku said, his voice steady. I focused on the threat. You did more than that, Aizawa countered, his gaze unwavering. You didn't just defeat that creature. You deconstructed it. You erased it. I've been a pro-hero for a long time. I've seen hundreds of quirks. Power like that, it doesn't just manifest in a teenager overnight. It doesn't come without a price, without a drawback. He leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, his bandaged face creating a grotesque silhouette. Every powerful quirk has a limit, a cost. Bakugo's arms ache from overuse. Todoroki can give himself frostbite or heat stroke. All might has a time limit. But you display a level of power that could level a city, and afterward, you just look a little tired. It's not logical. He was circling him, methodically breaking down the lie. Izuku's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation, a convincing deflection. Tell him the drawback is mental, Forlag supplied instantly. Tell him the focus required is immense, that overuse leads to a temporary state of emotional detachment. An acceptable psychological cost. It fits his observations. The drawback isn't physical, Izuku said, letting his gaze fall to the floor, feigning a troubled vulnerability. It's mental. Emotional. To control the energy, I have to turn things off. My fear. My panic. Everything. I have to become cold to use it safely. If I don't, I could lose control and hurt everyone around me. When it's over, it takes a while for things to come back online. That's what you saw, the after effect. It was a brilliant lie, woven from the truth of his experience but twisted to serve his narrative. It explained his coldness, his efficiency, his lack of apparent physical strain. It painted him not as a monster, but as a tragic, burdened hero, forced to sacrifice his own emotional well-being for the sake of control. Aizawa was silent for a long time, processing this new information. It was an explanation that, on the surface, fit the evidence. Psychological drawbacks were rare, but not unheard of. It explained the dissonance Kachi had felt. So you're saying, Aizawa said slowly, that to use your quirk, you have to essentially stop being human for a little while? I guess so, Izuku whispered, hating the taste of the words in his mouth. Aizawa leaned back, a deep, weary sigh escaping him. This is a dangerous path you're walking, kid. A power that requires you to shed your humanity to use it. That's how villains are made. Compassion, empathy, fear, these aren't weaknesses. They're guardrails. They're what separate us from the monsters we fight. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, his expression wasn't one of suspicion, but of genuine, profound concern. I'm grateful you saved me. You saved all of us. But I'm worried about you, Midoriya. Not as a student, but as a person. Whatever you do, don't lose sight of the boy who ran into that exam to save Uraraka from a pile of rubble. The moment your power becomes more important to you than the people you're trying to save, you've already lost. The sincerity of Aizawa's words was a physical blow. It was a phantom limb aching, a memory of a part of himself that was already gone. The boy Aizawa was talking about, the one who cried for others, who felt their pain as his own, he was a fading photograph. A ghost. Izuku could remember being that boy, but he could no longer feel what that boy felt. I'll remember, Sensei, Izuku said, the lie tasting like ash. Thank you. He bowed and left the classroom, the weight of Aizawa's concern a heavier burden than any physical injury. He had successfully defended the lie, but in doing so, he had only reinforced how much of himself he had already lost. He walked out of the school, the setting sun casting a long, lonely shadow before him. He saw Uraraka and Ida waiting for him by the gate. They had waited to walk him home. A gesture of friendship, of connection. He waved to them, and that empty, practiced smile once again slipped onto his face. It was getting easier to wear. It was beginning to feel like his own. The teacher is a sentimental fool, but his warning has a tactical merit, Forlag commented as they approached. Maintaining the illusion of humanity is paramount. These connections, these friendships, they are your camouflage. Use them. Maintain them. They will make the world trust you, even as you acquire the power to command it. Izuku nodded internally. It was logical. It was efficient. It was the only way forward. He would be their friend. He would be their classmate. He would smile and laugh and pretend to feel what they felt. He would be the perfect hero, a symbol of hope and strength. And no one would ever know that behind the smile, behind the hero's mask, there was nothing left at all. He had the power to save the world, but he had already lost the one thing that made it worth saving, himself. The aftermath of the USJ attack was a storm that settled into a tense, uneasy calm. UA High School, its invulnerability shattered, transformed into a fortress. The media frenzy was relentless. A hurricane of reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras and microphones hungry for sound bites of trauma and heroism. Inside those reinforced walls, however, life for the students of Class 1A resumed a semblance of normalcy. But it was a new kind of normal, forever changed by the specter of what they had endured. They were no longer just students, they were survivors. A shared trauma had forged a bond between them, a quiet understanding that manifested in small gestures of support and camaraderie. All of them, that is, except for one. Izuku Midoriya remained an island in that sea of newfound solidarity. He was the hero of the USJ, the boy who had faced down the League of Villains and emerged not just victorious, but transcendent. His classmates now looked at him with a reverence that bordered on worship, but it was the worship of a distant, incomprehensible deity, not the affection reserved for a friend. He was their savior, but he was not their peer. He played his part flawlessly. He participated in class, his answers always precise and insightful. He ate lunch with Uraraka and Ida, listening to their chatter, offering smiles and nods at the appropriate moments. He was a perfect actor, his performance of normalcy so convincing that only he and the silent passenger in his mind knew it was a lie. Their emotional fluctuations are highly inefficient, Forlag would observe as Uraraka laughed at a joke from Kaminari, or as Ida chopped the air in righteous indignation. They expend so much energy on these fleeting biochemical reactions. It is a weakness. Your detachment is a strength. It allows for clarity and focus, Izuku agreed. He saw their boisterous camaraderie not as a source of strength, but as a distraction. Their bonds made them predictable, their loyalties exploitable. He was beginning to see the world not as a place to live, but as a complex strategic board, and he was the only player with a clear view of all the pieces. The upcoming UE Sports Festival was the talk of the school, a chance for the students to showcase their abilities to the world. For most, it was a gateway to fame and sidekick offers. For Izuku, it was simply a platform. A stage on which to manage his own public image. You must not display your full power, Forlag advised as Izuku trained in the dead of night, levitating massive chunks of concrete with effortless telekinetic control. To do so would invite fear and suspicion on a global scale. We must cultivate an image of overwhelming strength, but one that is still perceived as a quirk. You must appear to have limits, even if you do not. The strategy was simple. Izuku would dominate, but he would do so using only the crudest applications of his power, superhuman strength, speed, and durability. He would present himself as the ultimate physical powerhouse, a worthy successor to the All Might archetype. It was a lie of omission, a carefully tailored deception to make his power palatable to a world that was not ready for the truth. The sports festival unfolded exactly as they had planned. He won the obstacle race with a display of speed that left everyone breathless. He dominated the cavalry battle, his team untouchable. In the one-on-one tournament, he was an unstoppable force. He defeated Shinse's brainwashing not by overpowering it, but by allowing Forlag to erect a psychic firewall in his mind, a feat he explained away as sheer force of will. His fight with Shoto Todoroki was the designated climax of his performance. He saw the tempest of rage and pain within the boy, the self-imposed shackles of a tortured past. The old Izuku, the empathetic boy from the rooftop, would have seen a soul in need of saving. The new Izuku saw a flawed asset operating at 50% efficiency. He didn't try to break through to Todoroki's heart with an impassioned speech. He broke through his defenses with overwhelming, calculated force. He shattered Todoroki's ice with concussive blasts of kinetic energy, forcing him to use his fire in self-defense. He didn't scream "It's your power," he stated, with cold, irrefutable logic. Refusing to use your full capabilities in combat is a tactical error that will lead to your defeat. Your personal history is irrelevant to the current strategic reality. It was not a plea for self-acceptance, it was an ultimatum. And it worked. Todoroki, pushed to his absolute limit, erupted in a maelstrom of fire and ice. Izuku, in turn, unleashed a single, controlled punch that produced a shockwave that dwarfed All Might's own, ending the match and shattering a significant portion of the stadium. He had won. He had saved Todoroki by forcing him to confront his power. And he had presented himself to the world as the next symbol of peace. All Might watched from the stands, a profound sickness churning in his gut. He saw the mimicry. The power, the smile, the overwhelming strength. It was a flawless imitation of his own persona. But it was a hollow imitation. There was no joy in Izuku's victory, no fire in his eyes. There was only the cold, quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. He was watching a puppet show, and he was terrified of the puppeteer. The world, however, was enthralled. Pro-hero agencies flooded him with internship offers. He was the talk of the nation. Izuku Midoriya, the miracle prodigy, the hero who had stared down the League of Villains and dominated the sports festival. He was the future. He chose to intern with Gran Torino, following the path All Might had suggested months ago, back when things were simple. It was another calculated move. To associate himself with All Might's mentor would further solidify his image as the heir apparent. Gran Torino was not fooled for a single second. The diminutive, jet-propelled hero was old, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the same thing Aizawa and All Might had seen, a boy with the power of a god and the emotional resonance of a stone. He put Izuku through grueling exercises, trying to find a limit, a breaking point, a flicker of the boy beneath the powerhouse. He found none. Izuku met every challenge with the same unnerving, inhuman efficiency. "You're powerful, kid," Gran Torino grunted after Izuku had perfectly mastered full cowling in a matter of minutes, a feat that had taken Tashinori months. "Too powerful. And too quiet. It's not natural." Izuku just smiled his empty smile. "I'm just a fast learner, sir." It was during his internship, while patrolling the streets of Hosa City, that the carefully constructed board of his new life was suddenly and violently overturned. The city of Hosu was on edge. The hero killer, Stain, had claimed another victim, the pro-hero Ingenium. The news sent a ripple of fear through the hero community. Ida, Ingenium's younger brother, had chosen to intern in Hosu, a decision fueled by a cold, burning desire for revenge that was plain for all to see. Izuku was on patrol with Gran Torino when the first Nomu attacked. It was a different model from the one at the USJ, less powerful, more bestial. As Gran Torino and other heroes engaged the creature, chaos erupted throughout the city. More Nomu, released by the League of Villains, began to rampage. A coordinated attack, Forlag analyzed, its voice calm amidst the screams and explosions. A diversion. Shigaraki is using these creatures as a smokescreen for another objective. He is an inefficient strategist, but he is learning. Then, Izuku received the text message from Ida. A string of numbers. A location. A distress call. Gran Torino was occupied. The other heroes were overwhelmed. Izuku knew, with cold certainty, that Ida had found Stain and was about to die. He is acting on an emotional impulse, revenge, Forlag stated. This is a predictable outcome. Allowing him to perish would be a valuable, albeit tragic, lesson for the other students on the dangers of emotional decision-making. However, his death would negatively impact class morale and cohesion, which is currently a useful asset for your public image. Intervention is the logically superior choice. There was no debate. No surge of panic for his friend. It was a simple tactical calculation. He gave Gran Torino a curt explanation and then he was gone, a green-black blur rocketing between buildings, his senses scanning the city. He found the alleyway in seconds, drawn by the scent of blood and the faint, cold aura of a powerful will. He landed silently at the mouth of the alley. The scene was a grim tableau. The pro-hero native was down, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Ida was on the ground, his ingenium armor pierced, a sword embedded in his shoulder. And standing over them was the hero killer himself. Kaizome Akaguro, Stain, was a terrifying figure. Dressed in ragged black gear, his face obscured by a tattered mask and a long, blood-red scarf, he radiated an aura of pure, fanatical conviction. His body was a roadmap of scars, his eyes burning with a zealot's fire. He held a blood-slicked katana, its edge glinting in the moonlight. Another fake, Stain rasped, his voice like grinding stones, as he saw Izuku. Drawn by the promise of fame and fortune from the sports festival. "You are not a hero. You are a disease. Get out of here, Midoriya." Ida choked out, his face pale with pain and shame. "This is my fight. He will not claim another ingenium." Izuku ignored him. His gaze was fixed on Stain. His chaos-weave senses analyzed the man, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something akin to professional interest. "Fascinating," Forlag murmured. His quirk, Bloodcurdle, allows him to paralyze a target upon ingesting a sample of their blood. A simple but highly effective ability when combined with his exceptional physical prowess. But it is not his quirk that makes him dangerous. It is his ideology. It is a crystallized, weaponized philosophy. He is, in his own way, as much of a purist as you are becoming. This was not a thug. This was not a monster. This was an ideologue. And his ideology was a direct challenge to everything Izuku was pretending to be. "You're the one who preaches about true heroes," Izuku said, his voice quiet, devoid of the panic or righteous anger Stain was used to hearing. "You believe that most heroes are fakes, driven by greed and vanity. You seek to cull them, to purge society of their influence." Stain straightened up, intrigued by the boy's calm demeanor. "You understand, then? Unlike these other children, you grasp the core of my crusade. Then you must also understand why you, the star of that gaudy festival, must die. You are the epitome of the modern, corrupt hero." He licked the blood from his blade, and Ida's body went completely rigid, paralyzed. Stain turned his full attention to Izuku, adopting a low, predatory stance. "But I will grant you a warrior's death. Show me your conviction." He moved, and he was fast, faster than Aizawa, faster than any non-speed enhanced hero Izuku had ever seen. He was a blur of motion, his katana a silver arc aimed at Izuku's heart. The old Izuku would have panicked, would have desperately tried to remember his training, would have been overwhelmed. The new Izuku simply watched him come. Time seemed to slow. He saw the precise angle of the blade. He tracked the infinitesimal shifts in Stain's muscles. He perceived the flow of air around the hero killer's body. To Izuku, it was like watching a child trying to swat a fly. He didn't dodge. He didn't block. He took a single, precise step to the left, the tip of the katana whispering past his uniform, missing him by less than a millimeter. As Stain's momentum carried him past, Izuku raised his hand, not in a fist, but with his fingers outstretched. He gently tapped 2 fingers against the back of Stain's neck. It was a touch, not a blow. But in that touch, a microscopic, pinpoint surge of the chaos weave was released. It wasn't enough to unmake him, not even enough to truly harm him. It was just enough to sever the connection between his brain and his spinal cord. Stain's body went completely limp. His eyes, still burning with fanaticism, widened in utter disbelief. He was still conscious, still aware, but his body had become a useless prison of flesh and bone. He collapsed to the ground in a heap, his sword clattering on the pavement. He couldn't move a single muscle. He was completely, utterly paralyzed, not by his own quirk, but by a power he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The alley fell silent, save for Ida's ragged, astonished breaths. Izuku walked over and stood above the fallen hero killer. He looked down into those furious, helpless eyes. "Your ideology is flawed," Izuku stated, his voice as cold and dispassionate as a coroner's report. "You judge heroes based on their motivations, fame, wealth, vanity. These are emotional, irrational metrics. The only logical metric for a hero's worth is their effectiveness. Do they neutralize threats? Do they protect civilians? Do they maintain order? Their reasons for doing so are irrelevant." He crouched down, bringing his face close to Stain's. "You call All Might a true hero. I call him an inefficient one. His desire to save everyone with a smile, to engage villains in prolonged, destructive brawls, is born of sentimentality. The optimal solution is always the swiftest, most decisive one. A threat should be identified and neutralized with surgical precision. Like this." He held up his hand, a small, crackling ball of black-green energy hovering over his palm. "I could end you right now. I could unmake you, and the world would be quantitatively safer. No more dead heroes, no more terror. It would be the most efficient, most heroic action to take." Stain couldn't speak, but the sheer, indomitable force of his will blazed in his eyes. It was a look of defiance, of disgust, of a fanatic facing a heresy more profound than any he had ever imagined. And in that moment, looking into the mirror of Stain's absolute conviction, a flicker of something long dormant stirred within Izuku. It wasn't empathy. It wasn't compassion. It was a question. Stain, for all his madness and violence, believed in something. His actions, however horrific, were driven by a white-hot core of ideological passion. He was willing to die for his twisted definition of heroism. What did Izuku believe in? He believed in efficiency, in logic, in order. These were Forlag's beliefs, principles of a cold, cosmic calculus. But where was Izuku in that equation? What was his conviction? The dream of saving people with a smile felt like a memory from another lifetime, a faded photograph of a stranger. He had the power to enforce his will on the world, but what was his will? You're a fake hero, Ida spat from the ground, tears of shame and rage streaming down his face. A real hero wouldn't talk like that. They wouldn't stand over a defeated foe and lecture them like a villain. The words struck a nerve. A hero. A villain. The lines were becoming blurry. Midoriya, a new voice. Shoto Todoroki arrived at the end of the alley, a plume of ice and fire heralding his presence. He had also received Ida's distress call and had come running. He took in the scene at a glance, Ida and Native down, Stain paralyzed, and Izuku standing over him, an unnerving stillness about him. Izuku stood up, the crackling energy in his hand dissipating. The moment of introspection was over. The performance had to resume. Todoroki-kun, he said, his voice reverting to its usual calm, friendly tone. Good timing. Can you help me secure him? I believe I've managed to sever a nerve cluster, but I'm not sure how long the paralysis will last. He turned away from Stain, leaving the hero killer to his silent, impotent fury. He was no longer a philosophical challenge. He was just another captured villain, another problem solved. But as they tied up the hero killer, waiting for the authorities to arrive, Stain's blazing eyes never left Izuku. He had seen past the power, past the heroic facade. The symbol of peace was a fraud, a man of flesh and blood propping up a lie. But this boy was something far more dangerous. He wasn't a fake hero. He was a void, an abyss that had learned to smile. He was a walking, talking refutation of the very concept of heroism. Later, as the chaos in Hosu died down, a winged Nomu swooped down and snatched Izuku, attempting to fly away with him. Stain, seeing the thing that was not a hero trying to capture the boy who was the antithesis of a hero, acted on pure, primal instinct. Breaking free from his paralysis with a surge of sheer willpower, he had thrown a knife, piercing the Nomu's brain and saving Izuku. He had then delivered his famous, terrifying speech to the assembled heroes, his indomitable will projecting an aura of bloodlust that paralyzed everyone, including All Might's mentor. His words about culling the fakes, about the one true hero, All Might, echoed through the night. But as he was finally subdued, his last, hate-filled glare was not for Endeavor, not for Gran Torino. It was for the quiet, green-haired boy standing in the crowd. His speech had been for the world, but his warning had been for Izuku alone. Izuku watched it all, his face a mask of mild concern, playing the part of the rescued student perfectly. But inside, he was analyzing. Stain's ideology, his will, his quirk, it was all just data. The man's fanaticism had made him strong, but it had also made him rigid and predictable. A liability. As he walked away from the scene, the city lights reflecting in his vacant eyes, he felt the cold certainty of Forlag's logic settling back over him. Conviction, passion, ideals, they were just variables, complications in the equation of absolute order. Stain had been a fascinating anomaly, a disruption in the system. But like all disruptions he had been dealt with. He had been neutralized. And Izuku Midoriya, the hero with the empty smile, continued his inexorable march forward, leaving another stain on the very idea of the hero he was supposed to be.